All right, people. Apparently had an audio problem. Let me know if it works, and then I will continue. Maybe I've been hacked. Maybe the same firm that developed this ridiculous app has also bungled my audio system here. Maybe it's Russia. Maybe it's somebody. But please just inform me if the sound is good. Okay, the sound's good. Then let us continue. So, within the last minute, Bernie's campaign put out a spreadsheet that it claims reflects internal figures for nearly 40% of Iowa caucus precincts. And this sampling shows Bernie at 29.66%, Pete at 24.59%. I mean, this doesn't mean anything. It's their internal figures and it's less than 40%. So it's just like this caucus is totally screwed. Nobody's going to believe it. Nobody's going to believe whatever results they put out. You can't believe what a campaign says about the results. I think they were kind of forced into it because Pete declared victory. But there's no legitimacy to this. This is just crazy. I'm struggling to even find the words because I just can't conceive of an entity on the face of the earth that has screwed up royally more consistently than the DNC and its affiliates. I mean, you couldn't have tried to screw this up more. I'm assuming at some point they are going to put out what they claim to be the results are, but the results can't be viewed as legitimate now. There's systematic incompetence in how the results themselves were tabulated. And then on top of that, you have multiple system failures in terms of how the results were recorded and then transmitted to the party apparatus. So, I mean, this is just insanity. And I know people are going to try to impute some intentionality that there was a conspiracy here. And normally I would say don't let your mind wander into that territory without at least some evidence to suggest it. But I can't blame people for coming up with conspiracies on this. Apparently, the turnout in the caucus was not even at a record high. People were saying, "Oh, it looks like the turnout is going to smash records." Well, no, at least what they're saying preliminarily, and we don't know for sure because the results aren't, and we don't have the firm data. But at least there are reports that suggested that the turnout was similar to 2016, which was a relatively low turnout caucus, at least compared to 2008, which was the historic high. So it's not as if there was this genuinely massive influx of new caucus goers, apparently. It's just that they couldn't put together a competent system to handle it. Now, I don't know if you heard me say this on the last stream before it got interrupted by an audio issue, but yeah, there is reporting now that the app that was designed to handle all this, but remember, the app failed, but then apparently also the secondary backup system failed. So you have multiple layers of failure here, or multiple layers at least of claimed failure. Biden now claims 2 layers of failure, which may be a little self-interested because he doesn't seem to have done particularly well. But Li Fang is saying from The Intercept that the firm Shadow developed this Iowa Democratic Caucus app. The firm was paid for by the Nevada and Iowa Democratic parties, and also by Mayor Pete's campaign. And people just unearthed a tweet from one of the founders of this shadowy firm celebrating the entrance of Mayor Pete into the race almost a year ago. So it's just like, and then he declares victory tonight. I mean, I think at this point, barring any new revelatory information, I just have to say, just consider the Iowa caucus, effectively void and move on. I mean, as nutty as that sounds, I mean, Did we never conduct caucuses or elections before February of 2020 without an app? They couldn't have just used paper and like, I mean, give me a break. So, I mean, you're going to get chastised probably as a conspiracy theorist if you assume some kind of sinister intention here. But there is something sinister afoot. We can't say precisely what yet, but even the scope of the systematic incompetence is itself sinister because the Democratic Party has more than enough resources to make sure that this was done correctly. They could have done test runs. They could have made sure everybody was briefed on how to do this smoothly. It's been done before. The Iowa caucus in again 2008 resulted gave results, if I'm remembering correctly, pretty quickly in the night. And if the initial reports are accurate here, the turnout was much higher, so there would have been more logistical issues that year. So I don't know what to say. It's just like the Democrats never cease to amaze you in terms of how either incompetent they can be or how sinister they can be. Probably some unseemly fusion of the two here. I don't want to get ahead of myself and make any factual assertions that can't be corroborated, but all I can really say is that if you have a very dark impression of what occurred here, you're justified in that. Again, barring any significant updates to this story. Um, it's funny to me how Americans love to lecture other countries about how to run their democracies, and then we can't even get a relatively low turnout caucus done because the data geniuses in the DNC think that they have to devise an app, and they don't even have like a backup plan. I mean, really, I think you have to just regard the results here as void. And maybe you could tell that I'm sort of furiously refreshing Twitter. Yeah, so so I just saw that Chris Dodd, who ran for president in 2008, campaigned furiously in Iowa, got very little support, is now backing Biden. He says you can't essentially cannot not trust the results at all. So what's the deal here? Is it Mike Bloomberg hatching some kind of elaborate plan to somehow boost his own fortunes? Possibly. I mean, who benefits from this more than Mike Bloomberg? Right? Who's already gone up in the polls substantially, is at number 3 right now, according to some polls nationwide, and just bypassed the first 4 states and is building up a huge amount of infrastructure elsewhere with a particular investment in the Super Tuesday states. How is the Nevada caucus going to be held now if they're using the same technology that was totally botched here? I mean, this is a twist of epic proportions. And maybe now the decision by Tulsi to essentially not contest Iowa and just go straight to New Hampshire looks pretty good. Because if it's just total chaos and confusion, who knows what could happen the next week? Tonight, by the way, Tulsi stopped at a Ben and Jerry's and was handing out ice cream. So she was just kind of floating above it all. Here in Manchester. Um, I did have one caucus goer in Des Moines who was a very staunch Tulsi backer, active on Twitter. Don't want to reveal his name or his Twitter handle just because, it's not a high follower account. Don't want people flooding him or anything. But he did tell me that he caucused for Tulsi in Des Moines and then joined the Bernie group on the second alignment. Saw a couple other examples of that. I saw one Tulsi guy apparently with a Klobuchar because Bernie was not viable in that precinct. A Yang person contacted me and said that he went for Pete. And obviously it's not legitimate to say that Pete won this caucus, but I did get some anecdotal reports from people on the ground who were relaying that Pete won their precincts by a wider than expected margin. So maybe he did do a little bit better than expected. The race was always in the margin of error, down to the wire here. I don't know that many people expected that Pete would necessarily be the main beneficiary, but it's possible that they won, but it's not possible to conclude with certainty either way at this point. It's just totally disputed. So this thing is void. I'm just going to say it's void based on what we know now. And, it makes political sense for after Pete declaring victory, the Bernie campaign to issue this spreadsheet showing that Bernie apparently had a slight edge in the 40%, less than 40% of the precincts that they have data for. But I mean, it's not a neutral number. It's a self-interested number. And I don't blame them for doing it, but you need an independent authority to tabulate these results. It's an election. Yeah, it's just crazy. Another Tulsi guy who I spoke to basically said that he caucused for Tulsi on the first alignment, but everybody there was so condescending and sarcastic and scornful toward him that he left afterwards and didn't complete the caucus process by going to another alignment. So, a classy night and a productive night and a well run night all around for the Democrats as usual. I mean, the two people laughing sinisterly with total joy and glee over this debacle are Mike Bloomberg and Donald Trump, and possibly Biden, because a caucus state was probably never going to be good for Biden in the first place. I mean, the caucus state privileges younger, motivated people who have organizing prowess to go out and really fine tune their approach to the idiosyncrasies of the caucus itself. And that was never Biden's strength. So maybe, he gets a boost from this because the results are muddled to say the least, if not totally negated. The New Hampshire primary is a week from tomorrow. So I'm feeling pretty good about my decision to focus on New Hampshire. Because I think that the New Hampshire primary is going to turn out to be effectively the start of the nominating process, and Iowa is essentially going to have to be discarded. Or they'll have to redo it, or they have to do something. But, Pete the Spook. I mean, the thing is, Pete declared victory, and a lot of people in the media are expressing, skepticism about his doing so. But in a way, it's like the power move, because if the results are going to be contested anyway, you might as well just declare victory, and then if that is contradicted later on, I mean, so what? It's so the Democrats managed to screw up their caucus on the same week that their screw up regarding impeachment is going to come to a culmination because Trump's going to be acquitted on Wednesday. So an epically catastrophic week for the Democratic Party. One of many weeks, but this may take the cake because In the times that I've been following elections, there's never been anything as crazy as this in terms of total chaos. We knew that Donald Trump won the election nationwide at this point in November 2016 on the date of the election. And they can't even get a little low turnout caucus done properly. It's nutty. And you'll have to excuse me for continuing to refresh Twitter because I don't know what else to do here. Yeah, the data geniuses out there are just unbelievable. um so I would expect to hear conspiracy theories about this probably till the end of time. I would expect it to cast a cloud over the entire nominating process henceforth. I would expect that we're never going to have full clarity on who won the 2020 Iowa caucus, and probably there will never be a caucus again. So if you were in Iowa, you maybe experience history because it's really difficult to imagine anybody's ever going to tolerate a caucus ever again. If it was bungled this catastrophically, there's just no justification for ever doing it again. And I know people have arguments against the caucus. I actually thought prior to tonight, and even watching some of the early caucus activity, that there is some utility. I've thought this for a long time. I've always thought that there is some utility to a caucus. There is some utility to having a primary system that is a mix between caucuses and primary states that are in small to medium-sized states in the early goings of the primary, because it means that candidates who don't necessarily have a huge national profile can prevail and get a boost. Whereas if you just had a national primary or you started with California or New York or something, it would be way too heavily weighted toward the candidate who could just flood the country with advertisements and who has a existing national profile like a Biden, or even to some extent, frankly, to a Bernie who has a huge national profile. But this fiasco is going to make everybody reevaluate that because it's beyond belief what they did here. In a raw political sense, this is pretty good for Tulsi. I'm not saying she's a favorite to win New Hampshire. I think there's a possibility that she overperforms. But if you have a totally muddled and even negated result in Iowa, then you're starting new in New Hampshire. And this is where she focused all her resources anyway. She wasn't contesting Iowa. She's been in New Hampshire more in the past month or two than any other candidate. And she seems, just in my observations, to be making progress. She seems to be gaining voters here every day. Just in my personal discussions with people who meet her, interact with her, go to her events, they decide on the fly that they will be supporting her. So if nobody has, quote, momentum out of Iowa, if nobody can claim to be on this like ineluctable trajectory to the nomination yet, then maybe things are really in flux and she can get a surprise showing in New Hampshire. It's not implausible because we've never had a situation like this before. So cast many of your assumptions aside. Bernie obviously is still polling well in New Hampshire. But Pete just claimed victory in Iowa. And some people are just going to hear him claiming victory and thinking, oh, I guess Pete won Iowa. Because the casual news consumer doesn't spend a lot of time obsessing on Twitter about individual precinct results or the app or whatever. So Pete made a pretty muscular and probably politically smart move by just declaring victory, as sleazy and unjustified empirically as that was. Somebody says that TYT is having a meltdown. They are screaming at and insulting each other. They finally switched to a non-public stream. What are they doing exactly? Why are they screaming at each other? I mean, not that I necessarily care that much, but that sounds a little funny. I don't know who's screaming at who and for what reason, but I mean, I don't blame them for venting their anger because the results, the official results as of like 20 minutes ago on the Iowa Democratic Caucus website, which was supposed to report all this stuff at starting at 8 starting at like 9 p.m. tonight. I wish I could show you this, but it says the result total for each candidate is 0 right now. We have nothing. I mean, there was like an exit poll which was showing Pete doing surprisingly well, sort of neck and neck with Bernie. But I mean, that's not sufficient. I mean, this is just, it's mind blowing. I don't know what more to say. I'm just refreshing this stuff like everybody else. But the results are not legitimate now, whatever they may end up doing. So, I don't know. What do you people think? Let me scroll through some of these super chats. Somebody says eat the rich. Okay, fair enough. Somebody says headlines: how dare Bernie release his results? Obviously, Pete should declare victory. I don't know. I think you're going to see some skepticism on Pete's declaration of victory because everybody who's at least moderately informed about what's going on here knows that there was no empirical basis that's at least publicly available for Pete to declare victory. And nobody's going to trust the results anyway. That's why I'm saying it should just be voided at this point. And there's a precedent for a state being voided. In 2008, Florida and Michigan violated the Democratic Party's protocols by moving their primaries earlier than was eligible, and so they just didn't seat those two states' delegates. So you're just gonna have to, I think, penalize Iowa and just not seat their delegates. But I don't know. It's just, this is a national embarrassment of epic proportions. And don't know what more to say, really, or what to add. All right, people. I mean, the utility of me doing the stream now as things are in flux is probably diminishing because I'm kind of like half paying attention to my feed here. So I'll give you an update in the morning. Obviously, I'm going to be with Tulsi again. Got a lot going on, and attention is now shifting to New Hampshire, where I feel like I have a pretty good lay of the ground. So I'll be back with you soon, and we'll navigate this chaos together. All right, take care.